I have a special video for you today. So this is going to be the August mastermind that was filmed for the Envision members. There's a lot of value in this, a lot of vulnerable topics that I go into as well. So I decided to share this. Take your time, go through it properly, apply these steps, and it's going to transform your trading. I promise you. Other than that, sit back, relax, and of course, enjoy the video. Right, guys. Well, first and foremost, welcome to the first mastermind. Very excited for this. It's going to be a bit of a tricky one to explain. I think naturally, because we are looking at psychology, there's going to be a part of me as we dive a little bit deeper that has a little bit of resistance in terms of talking about certain topics because it's quite vulnerable. However, this is something that's going to speed up a lot of people's journeys. I think as soon as I understood this whole concept and how to apply it and actually experimented with the topic as well, it just completely changed everything. So this is something that I don't hear talk about not even once in the trading space, apart from maybe one or two of the concepts, but it's briefly explained in a book, but we'll dive deep today. So quick disclaimer before we do start, I am not a psychologist. I have to say this. Everything included in this monthly mastermind is just literally based off my own learning, based off my own experience, my own kind of scientist in the lab kind of guinea pig, testing for myself. It may or may not work for you. It's worked for me, may not work for you. The concepts in this video should be done ideally under supervision of a qualified professional, such as mental health provider, hypnotherapist, like I've been using, or specialist. And this is not something you have to do. You can be successful in trading without this, but being aware of your own behavioral patterns and limitations is just a bonus, I think, personally. Right, first principle, the success cycle. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but what you do essentially have is you have two sides of you. You have the side of you that wants to build. It wants to build businesses, it wants to build your physique, your health and fitness, it wants to build your relationships. That's one part of you. That's our successful side. But we also have a side of us that no one really talks about. And it's the side that tends to destroy. It wants to destroy the success. It wants to destroy relationships. It wants to destroy everything that you've built, which ties into a deeper topic, which we'll later get involved in. Now, it's about merging these topics, but I'll get into it further down the line. Now, this cycle is very interesting. I've noticed myself get involved in this. I think it will be the exact same for you. So let's get into it. Frustration. This is how my cycle starts. Now, everyone's going to be different. Yours could be anger, frustration, being annoyed with yourself. It could be being fed up, or it could just be being sick and tired of the situation that you're in, right? But everything starts from this core root, which is frustration. So let's take it into account that you're frustrated with your lack of success. You're frustrated with the fact that you are at this current ceiling that you are at, and you want to get to that next level. When you are frustrated, that then causes a shift in your perspective because it forces you to drive. It forces you to take action, right? It's a powerful force. When you're frustrated and you're so sick and tired of the situation that you're in, you will think outside the box and you will think in terms of, right, what can I actually do to level up now? What can I do to earn that money? What can I do to fix this relationship? Whatever it may be, you think outside the box, and that's a powerful force. Frustration leads into drive. Drive then creates results, right? So you go into this ever-forming cycle, and then that eventually leads into pride. Now, pride is a fascinating topic because we all like to be proud of ourselves, right? You're proud of your journey, you're proud of how far you've come. There's a certain point in your journey where that's very helpful as well. However, pride can be quite dangerous at some point in time because of the fact that when you are prideful, you settle off. You maybe stop doing all the things that you were doing to get you successful in the first place, maybe consistent in the markets. It could be, for example, you hit the gym for 2 months consistently. You get into a state where you're happy with your physique, you're happy with your health and fitness, and you slack off. You're like, you know what, that cheat meal is fine. That day that I was meant to go to gym, I'm going to give it a miss because I feel tired. Or it could be in the markets, my results are really good. Perfect. I'm just going to slack off the markups, or I'm not going to watch the weekly market breakdown, or you know what, I've done enough work, I should reward myself a little bit. These kind of things come into the picture here. And then that, of course, leads into a cycle of being comfort. Now, comfort is very dangerous. Number one, because there's no stress. Now, we often see stress as a bad thing, which can be, but there can be good stress. When you've not got any stress, there's nothing pushing you forward. There's nothing driving you to that next level. So of course you get into that cycle again of frustration. And it's this ever-forming cycle that we always go into. And this leads me into this next section, right, which is this oscillation cycle. And it's the same thing. What we have here is life, basically. We have this oscillation between peaks and troughs. Right? So I like to call it the mental ceiling or the mental floor. Now, this is where this cycle here comes into place, because where we start off is in a cycle of frustration. We start off initially in frustration. That then creates the drive. You start to take action, you start to get results again, and that leads into pride eventually. Now, pride is where you hit your ceiling. This could be a target you've never hit before. You feel satisfied within yourself that you're at a good level. Now, this is a problem, because then once you've hit that, you're essentially going backwards. You're constantly oscillating between this period of frustration into pride, into drive, pride, and then comfort. And this cycle continues. It's the reason you get people who are maybe in a 9-to-5 job, they earn 30 grand a year, they're happy with the situation, and that could be fine for them. But they're always going between this fluctuation of peaks and troughs, and they're never going to get out of it. Our goal is to essentially manipulate this cycle, which we will get into in a little bit. Where is it? Here we go. We'll get into this properly in a little bit, but our goal is to manipulate the cycle so that we can create peaks and troughs. But every time we create a trough, it's essentially you're stepping up a gear. You're not coming all the way down to your previous benchmark. You're setting new benchmark so that you can essentially catapult to the upside, essentially like a bit of a trending market. That's our goal, but it's very different from how most people operate, and we need to be able to understand the cycle to change it. So that's that. Now, in all aspects of life, we have this oscillation. I've just related this to finances and overall success, but you have this with health and fitness. You have it with finances. You have this with relationships. You even have it with trading, which we'll dig into as well. And then you could have it in terms of cleanliness, how clean your car is, how clean your house is. This is in all aspects of life. This is not just trading, or this is not just life. We can relate it to everything. Now, a little homework for you guys, just to start things off. At the end of the webinar, what I want you to do is get out a pen and paper and map this cycle for every single thing in your life. Finances, trading results, health and fitness, relationships, cleanliness. Go as far as you want to. The awareness of this cycle is the ultimate key. I spent some quality time doing this, and honestly, it changed the absolute game for me. So I highly recommend doing this. Now, a couple of things to say here. What you celebrate will become your new standard. So let's say, for example, I'm not going to get too into it, but let's call it 5% per month. If 5% per month is your celebration period, that's going to become your standard, right? The true root cause of limit is celebration. As soon as you start celebrating things, it becomes your limit, your mental ceiling, because you're putting weight on that. So if it's 10% per month profit, as soon as you start getting to that and celebrating, you start to relax off, you start to get into these peaks again. And before you know it, back in the comfort cycle, back down, the cycle starts again. So have a think. You will be able to relate to this more than you know, right? And what we find is that we tend to oscillate between the peaks and the troughs. And then in the middle, there is some sort of mean, some sort of equilibrium. So just to tie this into finances, just so you can properly understand what I'm saying here before we move on, is your mental ceiling of how much you've had in your bank account could be 20 grand, right? If this is 20 grand here, of the most you've had in your bank account at one time, 20 grand. If the ceiling here, if the benchmark, if the floor here is, let's say 1 grand, there's going to be this big fluctuation between the 20k and 1k. And what you'll find is, as your bank account starts to decrease in numbers, you start to get towards that 1k figure, you're going to figure it out, because you will set that hygiene standard for yourself that you will not allow yourself to drop below that. So this is where you think outside the box. This is where you will do things out of the ordinary. You'll work very hard to get yourself off of that level. It's almost like a bit of a support region, or an order block, you could essentially call it. Now, the same thing with here. As soon as you get to that 20 grand mark, you start to settle off, you start to slack, you start to become comfortable. Before you know it, you're back down here. So this is why it's very important for you to understand this cycle in general. Now, let's move on to the next one. Right, so I'll share a very quick story in a minute. It's something I've already told, but it's important. So for context, I'll share some of my own behavioral patterns. So when I'm frustrated with myself, maybe, I don't know, I've slacked off a little bit, discipline's gone out the window for a few days, I've reached burnout, whatever it may be, everyone goes through that, I do as well, right? It happens from time to time. When I'm in that period and I'm frustrated with myself, the frustration is what kicks me into that next level of drive. Now, that's when I'm very strict and I dial into work mode. You would have seen me maybe over social media in the past where I've gone ghost mode or monk mode, or just really focused on myself, deleted my socials and just really hammered the work home. I've done that in multiple periods of my life so far. This is what I tend to do because I understand, right, I'm at a very much a floor now. I need to get to that next level. In order to do that, I can't have distractions. In the past as well, I've sacrificed relationships growing up. There's so many different things I've done to essentially get myself to focus to get to that next level. And it's been an interesting one. Now, with the peaks on the opposite end of the spectrum, I tend to notice that I need to reward myself, which stems into a deeper topic, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I tend to want to go on more trips. I tend to want to reward myself. I have the thought process of, you've done well, you've worked hard, let's just slack off for a few days, let's just relax, take it easy, you're comfortable, you're doing well. These thoughts come into play and it's very fascinating to me. And I told a story in mini lessons a few weeks back, and this is something recent, so it's a lot less of an extreme point of view than what I would have had in the past, but it still happens. I need to be aware of it, right? This is my own cycle, and I'm being vulnerable sharing this. But there was a time, I think I took a Eurodollar win, and it was about 3-4 weeks ago, you probably remember. And I took the win, banked the profits. I was then making lunch, so I had to go out to the shops. Now, whilst I'm in the shops, I passed through the chocolate aisle on the way to the till. And then suddenly I had the thought of, it's been a good day. You've banked the profits, you've made such and such money, you've done well. Reward yourself, get a little bit of chocolate just to celebrate. And then I caught myself in that cycle. I was like, hang on a minute. Why did I just think about that? Why did I want to reward myself for an individual win? Because an individual win, you have to understand, is just a part of the job. Now, this ties back into a deeper cause of, as I was developing through my trading journey, rewarding the wins along the way was an important step. And it is, because when you're not getting success or when you're trying to break through into consistency, you want to reward the wins. Every time you get a win, taste it. Sense it, see what it feels like. You want to recognize the good habits so that you can repeat the process again. But you get to a certain stage, and this is what I forgot, is that consistency is a byproduct of it. You're consistent, you've been consistent for a long time. You don't need to celebrate the wins. The wins is just a part of the job. If your strike rate, for example, is 70%, you're going to be winning for a lot of the time. So it's a case of not rewarding the individual wins, but the sequence of wins. And I caught myself in that cycle, and I was like, hang on a minute, what am I doing? I need to snap out of this. And that's when I obviously wrote the mini lesson to you guys. So it's about being aware of your own individual behavioral patterns. But this ties into inchworm theory. I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of this concept as well. So we're going to talk about this. Now, the inchworm theory is going to tie in directly to this, so we'll go back and forth. Now, the inchworm theory basically is named after a worm that, if we look at this in terms of a worm, we've got the front end, we've got the middle, we've got the end. As the inchworm moves forward, its front end moves forward first, then followed by the top end, and then followed lastly by the end of the worm to essentially move. This is what's called the A, B, and C game. Now, your A game represents your best performance. Your C game represents your worst performance or your worst game. Your B game is somewhere in the middle. It's essentially like the mean or the equilibrium. The focus always, initially, is to bring the A game forward. So in terms of trading results, this is done by increasing profit, which stems from minimizing drawdown. So it could be building a buffer and then being offensive in the right areas, something that I talk about quite often. The key then is to also make sure the C game is also driven forward. This is done by minimizing drawdown periods. So if we quickly go back to here, the reason this is important is if you consistently push your A game higher, this is your A game, remember? If you consistently push this higher, when you do drop off, because we all drop off, that's just us being honest, we all drop off. It's just to what effect? How can we minimize the damage? If your A game is all the way up here and your C game is down here, there is such a big drop off and a huge fluctuation between your A and C game. So to bring this back, if your A game is you return 15% ROI for a set period, and then you go into this wild fluctuation drawdown period that takes you into minus 10%, you lose 10 trades in a row, you finish on plus 5. Notice the huge fluctuation between plus 15 and then plus 5. That's a 10% window there. You can't afford that to do with that on bigger capital, because if you do that, you're going to get into a huge cycle of boom and bust traders, and before you know it, you're going to lose a significant amount of capital. You're going to stress yourself out. It's going to be a nightmare. So you don't want to be that trader. Trader B, however, returns 15% ROI for a set period, goes into a 3% drawdown streak, but is able to minimize the damage. So reducing or removing risk like we do, focusing on pro trend ideally, recovery strategy, and then finishes on plus 12. So can you see the difference between the two traders here? Trader B has essentially moved his C game up in accordance with his A game. So his A game up here, he's bringing the C game up as he moves higher and higher to essentially get it to look something like this. Right, so there's minimizing drawdown periods as we move higher, then we reach that next streak higher, same thing as we go along, different cycle. This is a successful trader. This, however, is an average amateur trader. Hasn't quite broke through yet, but they are one tweak away from them breaking through. This is what you have to understand. So this is the interim theory. Now, like I said, the further we extend the high, the more distance there is between the high and the low. Therefore, if you do go into a bad period, there's going to be such a large fluctuation between your high and low. And it's all about what you are willing to accept versus what you want to achieve. That's the important thing. It's not always about, right, I have this huge goal here, that's my focus. It's about what hygiene standard am I willing to accept for myself. Just how you brush your teeth every morning, you make your bed maybe, you clean your car, you clean your house. You're not willing to drop below that level, because if you do, it would transform your identity into a different person. That's how your trading results should be. And our goal here is to essentially manipulate the cycle. And how we do that is by as follows, right? We have the peaks and troughs. It's such a mental mess up, and this is what you have to understand. But as you get into this cycle, you notice your own behavioral cues. Like for me, I'm very aware that I want to go on trips. I want to reward myself. I want to take time off. This is my cue to say, right, I'm at a good point, but this is where I can quite easily fall off. So here's what you do. When you notice those cues, this is when you have to forcefully, is what's known as flipping the floor, flip the benchmark essentially. Let's call it, your ceiling is 10 grand in your bank account. As soon as you get to that, you have to be so sick and tired of 10 grand a month or 10 grand in your bank account. And I know that sounds very wishy-washy, etc., but you've got to be so sick and tired of achieving your goal before you get it. It could be 10% per month, or it could be 10% for a quarter. Initially, you're happy with that. You want to reach that. That's your current ceiling. But if that's your current ceiling and you continue to be happy with it, you're not going to break that ceiling. Our goal is to break the ceiling, essentially retest it for higher highs, essentially, right? Market analogy. The way we do that is by being so sick and tired of making that 10% results thing, and by not celebrating essentially, when we do get to that level, we've got to set the benchmark so high for ourselves, because otherwise you're just going to be oscillating between this period of peaks and troughs throughout your entire life until you initially break the cycle. And it's so difficult to break the cycle. It's taken me conscious effort to break the cycle, right? So that's important. Now, this is addressing the symptoms, right? This is you know how you would go to the doctors and sometimes they address the symptoms, they maybe put a plaster on it, or they give you some medication that is just not addressing the root cause at all, right? This is that. However, it's important for us to understand this before we get into the root cause. So let's dig into the root cause, which is a bit more of the psychological part, which is where there may be a bit more resistance on my part, but we'll get into it. Let's talk about it. Now, there's two parts of you, one that builds and one that destroys. This is what's known as self-growth that builds, and I'm sure you've all heard of self-sabotage. This is the part of you that wants to destroy. But what we have to figure out is why. Why do we self-sabotage? What is the initiation period? What is the root cause of this? Well, it all comes down to our standards. Number one, how do we solve this? Well, number one, the awareness of our behavioral patterns, our behavioral cues. How do we act when we are in our troughs? How do we act when we are in our peaks? This is why it's important to get a pen and paper out after this and map out the different cycles in your life. Health and fitness, finances, relationships. Do it all, put the work in, you will be rewarded. Shadow work is another thing we're going to get into as well. And then to be able to manipulate the success cycle. Now, the inner resistance is what I like to call it. A big part of you desires success, right? But you may have a younger version of yourself that is either scared of success or doesn't think you actually deserve it. Think of it this way. If 95% of you desire success, but there is a 5% version of you inside that you've buried deep or suppressed over time that doesn't believe you are worthy of success, there's always going to be resistance there. It's almost like you are trying to run a marathon with handcuffs around your ankles. You can do it. It's going to take you time. You're still going to push forward. You're still taking steps forward, but there's resistance there. There's always going to be that thing holding you back. So when we say self-sabotage, it's not as if it's a case of there's a massive part of you that wants you to fail and, all that kind of stuff. I think it's very misunderstood. When we say self-sabotage, the reality is there could be a younger version of yourself that you suppressed down, maybe because it's pain or trauma, and it doesn't want you to succeed based on the fact that you've been through certain things, or you don't believe you're worthy of success. So it's important that we attack that, right? Because at the end of the day, this is what we want to aim for. But awareness is the ultimate key. So I hope you enjoyed that. There's a lot of free value in there you can actually take away and apply into the markets and your trading and overall just psychology in yourself. The rest of the video is available to professional Envision members, but for the purpose of obviously YouTube, I wanted to kind of give you a taste, give you a preview of the mastermind itself. But with respect to the paying members, we can't show in the entire content. But overall, hope you enjoyed the video. Enjoy the rest of your day. Speak to you soon.